When President Obama's Secretary of Defense, Bob Gates, said, Joe Biden has been wrong on every single national security issue his entire 46-year career, I laughed. I thought it was very funny because, number one, it was true. And number two, because Bob Gates was in the same administration as Joe Biden. Now, Bob Gates is an actual scholar. He has a PhD in Russia and Soviet history. But it doesn't take a scholar to see that he was right, that Joe Biden knows nothing about national security. In fact, Joe Biden might have told you he's a scholar, like he told the reporter he finished tops in his law school, and then the reporter fact-checked him and seen he almost flunked out. He failed at the bottom of his law school class. But it's not funny anymore. You know, I thought it was funny because it was true, and I thought it was funny because I would have never imagined the most incompetent, the most corrupt politician over the last 40 years would be president of the United States. And every one of his foreign policies have the predictable outcome: war in Europe, war in the Middle East. Just like his domestic policies, just very predictable: high inflation, just quality of life down, high interest rates, very predictable. Everything he said, you don't need to be a scholar like Bob Gates to figure out was going to be a disaster. This is the most disastrous president. Now, I know a lot of you guys tune in for Catholic content, but as Catholics, we must believe in peace. We pray for peace at every Mass, and it's our obligation to vote for peace. Under Joe Biden, there's been 2 new wars, millions of innocent civilians being killed in these wars, or thousands rather, innocent civilians being killed in these wars. Under Donald Trump, there were no new wars. In fact, he signed 4 peace agreements, what is now known as the Abraham Accords. And the media just kind of like makes it like it's no big deal. When he said he was going to do this, they laughed at him. When he said he was going to send his Jewish son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to negotiate these deals in the Middle East, they laughed even harder. When it was done, they said, oh, it was no big deal. But it was the first peace treaty in the Middle East in like 50 years. It was huge. If Obama did it, it would have been 24/7 news. I know this because before he was even president, they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize because liberals like the way people talk, and you know, they're all about feelings, so they gave Obama a peace prize. And even he felt funny. So I didn't even do nothing. I'm not even sworn in yet. He knew it was wrong. And then they wanted to take it back after he doubled down in Afghanistan, and, you know, doubled the amount of troops, and he was just as much of a war hawk as George Bush that the liberals hated. But Donald Trump had 4. The first one should have been major news. If it was, like I said, if it was Obama, it would have been major news. Israel and the United Emirates sign a deal to work together. A Muslim nation recognizing Israel's right to exist and doing business militarily, business-wise. And then Bahrain, same thing. Then Morocco, the same thing. Then Sudan, the same thing. 4 peace deals. And as far as Europe, you know, the plan all along, you know, once the KGB, always the KGB. No matter how nice and how religious Putin talks, he's KGB. And Putin said the biggest failure that he's ever experienced in his life was the Soviet Union allowing all these countries to go free. And his goal was to bring it back under communist rule. And, you know, when Obama was president, Obama was a weak president, and he tried to appease Russia, and it was a hot mic. If you're not a blue-collar historian like myself that don't remember these things, look it up on YouTube. I'm sure you'll find it. Hot mic, Obama saying, tell Vlad I'll have more flexibility after election. During the election, he was saying he was for missile defense in Europe. We got to protect our European allies. And Russia didn't want us to put up missile defenses. So President Medvedev at the time, if you remember, it was like a dual presidency, some funky comedina, but we all knew Putin was in charge. Obama said on a hot mic, he was whispering, he didn't think nobody could hear it, but the whole world heard him. Obama said, tell Vlad, Vladimir Putin, tell Vlad, this is my last election. After I'm elected, I'll have a lot more flexibility to work with him on, on things. And sure enough, after he was elected, he canceled the missile defense, which Poland and Romania, these European countries were devastated. Like, wow, you promised us, and now you're not going to do it. You're leaving us vulnerable to the Russians. And then what did Russia do 2 years later? They invaded a European country. They invaded Ukraine. And they took Crimea. And what did Obama do? He let them. All he sent was humanitarian aid. He gave the Ukrainians blankets and MREs, army food to eat. And the history was another Democrat president, Bill Clinton, I think it was 1996, with Russia, convinced the then Ukrainian president to get rid of his nukes. At that time, I think they had the third most nuclear weapons. And that was the deterrent from Russia. And he got guarantees and promises that if anyone would invade him, America, Russia, and Britain would protect them. Never mind Russia invaded them. No, all three of us would protect you. So the biggest mistake Ukraine made was they agreed to it and got rid of the nuclear weapons. So we had that promise, but Obama allowed them to go to the Crimea, take Crimea. And their eventual plan was Hillary to get elected, and she was going to let them take the rest. But Trump got elected, surprised the world, and he told Vladimir Putin, if you invade Ukraine, I'll drop a nuclear bomb on Moscow. Now, Mike Pompeo said he wasn't serious, but Vladimir Putin wasn't sure. There was about 5% uncertainty because, people were a little afraid of, Trump had a respect around the world. But what he did was even better. He broke the bank. He made America independent, energy independent. So the price of oil was so low that Russia couldn't afford a war. Russia's lifeblood is fossil fuels. Well, we didn't need to buy it. And we didn't go on the world, we didn't need as much on the world market because we supplied ourselves. It was the first time in American history we were energy independent. Guys like me were catching a break, paying $2 a gallon for gas, But the big picture was even greater. Iran's lifeblood was oil. Russia's lifeblood was oil. So these countries couldn't afford to fund wars because they were struggling financially. This is how Reagan broke them financially, how he broke the Soviet Union. Trump was following the same playbook. And he knew people were going to use fossil fuels. Anyone that's really looked into the subject knows we're like 50 years out to be without fossil fuels, So it was going to be pumped. So who's going to pump it, us or them, Biden gave in to his party because he just, he's just a political shill. He just wants to please who's going to get him elected. And so he gave in to the environmental extremists that run the Democrat Party. And he canceled our pipeline like the first day. And what did he do? He approved the pipeline that Trump wouldn't approve in Europe for the Russians. So he canceled our pipeline, but approved the Russian pipeline. And when we were energy independent, just for the record, according to the EPA, the United States air and water was the cleanest it's ever been in history. So, that's the goal, clean air, clean water. And if you can be energy independent, because you think the same amount of oil is being pumped out of the ground, but it's just being pumped by countries that could care less about the environment, that don't have any regulations. Okay, so the first thing Biden does is makes us dependent on Middle Eastern oil again, puts the price of oil up, and now Russia's making money. They can afford a war, okay? Iran, Donald Trump sanctioned them to where they couldn't sell oil. Joe Biden lifts their sanctions, so now they're selling oil. So not only are they allowed to sell oil and make money, oil is worth more money than it is, so they start funding their terrorist groups again. See, when Trump was president, not only did he make those 4 deals with those 4 Middle Eastern countries, but he had Saudi Arabia on the side of Israel too, because Saudi Arabia knew Iran funded terrorists. So they were happy to work with the Israelis in the United States because the price of oil was so cheap, they didn't have the leverage anymore. Like now, we're at their mercy. We've always been at the mercy of the Middle East. Now they're at our mercy because we hold all the cards. We're energy independent. We're the big guns going into the meeting saying this is how it's going to be. So what Trump told Saudi Arabia is, be at peace with Israel, work with Israel, do business with Israel, and we'll supply you with what you need to protect yourself from the Iranians. And we will sanction the Iranians so hard they won't be able to fund the Houthis, who's another terrorist organization that are fighting the government in Yemen. You see, because Iran are Shia Muslims and Saudi Arabia is the Sunni branch of Islam, and their friends in Yemen are Sunni, so Iran's funding the Shia. So Trump's team that he had around him brilliantly strategized and had everybody against Iran, the major funder of terrorists. This is why there was no major terrorism going on at the time. A few here and there, but nothing major like these savages did to Israel the other day. They were able to do that because not only did we free up Iran's oil where they can make money and give it to the terrorists, but Trump also froze up their assets that were in the banking system. And just last month, Joe Biden unfroze $6 billion for 6 hostages. So number one, he showed all the terrorists, America's willing to pay $1 billion for hostage. So like Ronald Reagan said, if you want something to increase, reward it. If you want something to decrease, penalize it. So we rewarded taking hostages, $1 billion a hostage, never done before. And then what did they do? They helped fund Hamas, and the next month, Hamas had the most brutal, savage, evil attack on Israel. And also, another thing Trump did, Biden funded Hamas, because in 2005, Israel left Gaza and said, we're going to let you guys run it. You elect your own leaders. And they elected Hamas, a terrorist organization. It would be like the equivalent, and this is not an exaggeration, the equivalent of elected ISIS to rule your government. So Trump's like, I'm not going to fund ISIS. I'm not going to fund Hamas. So he cut funding to this terrorist group. Joe Biden, guess what he did? He reinstated the funding. So now Joe Biden's funding Hamas. He's funding Iran. I mean, it doesn't take a scholar to see that there was going to be a major terrorist hit. And now with the open borders that he's allowing, Border Patrol saying they're catching people from Syria, from Lebanon, just this week. Iran, just this week, coming across our border illegally with no identification. So we don't know if they're terrorists or just decent people looking for freedom. We don't know. So Trump had 4 peace plans, and according to Mike Pompeo, his Secretary of State, they were working with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia was about to agree to be the 5th member of the Abraham Accords. I mean, this should have been like, the media should have been like shouting from the roof, this is major news, this is great news. But they kind of like just didn't really mention it, like it was no big deal. And again, if Obama did this, or Biden did this would be huge news. But because it was Trump, they didn't want to help him out with the press. They didn't want to give him any good press. But Donald Trump gave us 4 years of peace, no new wars. And Israeli intelligence is telling us that they now know Hamas made the decision to attack after they watched Biden's weakness in Afghanistan. And Iran agreed to fund them as soon as they could get the money freed. This was a plan going way back. And Trump's opponents will say, well, Trump made that agreement that we would leave. Yes, but Trump, again, according to Mike Pompeo and other members of his cabinet, sat down with the Taliban and said, if you harm one American or any of the our Afghan counterparts that we're going to bring with us, we will destroy you. And the first bomb is going to go on your house. And he told the leader of the Taliban his address. And they said that his eyes just spun up. He goes, yeah, we know where you live. And the first bomb's being dropped on your house. And then they gradually drew down to about 5,000 troops, but we had like 15,000 contractors backing us up, you know, ex-military guys, special forces guys, Air Force guys. And not one American casualty for this whole year. And military sources said Trump was entertaining the idea of leaving a small footprint, maybe 3,000. If we had 3,000, that would be enough. And he promised, like the deal was, we were going to get out. First, we're going to get out Americans, civilians, and then we're going to get out the 20,000 Afghan special forces that helped us, because every one of them had a price on their head and their family's head. We promised them that if they would help us. So they were going to get out next. The interpreters with them. Then our army would leave. But Biden wanted a press release by 9/11. He wanted to announce he's out. So against the recommendations, and he lied. He lied to George Stephanopoulos. I guess he figured because George Stephanopoulos was a Democrat, you know, he was Clinton's campaign manager, and now he's supposedly a news guy for ABC, so he figured he wouldn't call him out. But he did call him out. He lied to George Stephanopoulos and said, we won't leave any Americans behind. And they did. They left hundreds of Americans behind, and they left the 20,000 Afghan special forces that we promised to come out. And they were hunted down like animals and savagely killed with their families. And on my Rumble channel, I was trying to get away from politics on this, so I was talking about a lot of my Rumble channel at the time. And I was quoting like generals and special forces guys that said they have no plan. I'm asking what their plan is to get these special forces, and they have no plan. So obviously they didn't even plan it. And it's not surprising because Joe Biden is the guy. Again, I'm a blue collar historian. You know, I remember what I read and what I see. And Joe Biden was the guy in the 70s when he was a senator. And they said, hey, we promised to get these Vietnamese out of Vietnam when we leave. Are they going to be slaughtered? Are we going to get them out? And he said, we don't know them nothing. And he was part of the group that left them behind. And they were slaughtered. They were slaughtered by the communists. And he was callous about it. He's like, they're not our responsibility. He had the same attitude towards these Afghans that help us, and the same attitude towards the hundreds of Americans that were left behind. This guy does not care. So, as Catholics, we need to vote our conscience. And people say, oh, Trump's so mean, he's this and that. Listen, he's a narcissist. It's been said that no one becomes a president if he's not a narcissist. If you think you become president and you fight hard enough, you're a narcissist. The difference is some blow sweeter smoke. Bill Clinton and Barack Obama blew smoke that you'd be like, wow, this guy is wonderful. Trump didn't have that. Trump was blunt, said what he meant what he said, was proud to be a narcissist, was proud to be a billionaire, and he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But as intelligent, critical thinking human beings, we have to look at the results. On the domestic front, it was the first time in 30 years that blue-collar wages went up when inflation was accounted for. Blue-collar wages went up 9% under Donald Trump. Under Joe Biden, they went down. They're like negative 2%. Under Donald Trump, he said he would elect 2, maybe 3 originalist judges. And of course, Roe v. Wade will be overturned. And everybody laughed at him. Oh, the Roe v. Wade will never be overturned. But he knew the kind of judges he was going to pick. The originalist judges look at the original intent of the writers of the Constitution and base their decision on the law. Where activist judges that the Democrats put in look at the Constitution how they think it should be based on 2023, and they legislate from the bench. And even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, ultra-liberal hero on the Supreme Court, said, yeah, Roe v. Wade was bad law. It shouldn't have been, it was totally not constitutional. But I would uphold it because I'm pro-choice. So she admitted she legislates from the bench. But Donald Trump got Roe v. Wade overturned. And a direct result is thousands of babies being saved. But it brought it back to the states. That's why I always tell you guys, if you're buying or selling real estate, go to realestateforlife.org because the fight's not over. And realestateforlife.org is a pro-life Catholic real estate company that helps out pro-life organizations that are trying to get every state to ban abortion. So on the world stage, peace for 4 years under Donald Trump, wars under Joe Biden, many people getting killed. And make no mistake, this isn't an equal war in Israel where it's Palestinians against Israelis. No, this is evil against the Israelis. This is a terrorist group equivalent to ISIS, savagely attacking and targeting children and babies, versus Israel defending herself and telling civilians to leave. We're coming in, we're going to attack, we don't want you guys getting hurt. There's no moral equivalent. And you may not like Zelensky, but there's no moral equivalent there. Vladimir Putin said he wants to bring back the Soviet Union and communist rule, and Joe Biden was going to let him. I mean, we seen troops. Again, it didn't take a general to know what he was going to do when he mounted 200,000 troops along the border, and it took weeks, and Joe Biden did nothing. He did nothing. Trump would have not allowed it. Number one, they wouldn't have the money because the price of oil would have been too low for them to make enough money to do that troop movement. But number two, Trump wouldn't have allowed it because not only did he tell Putin, and again, they did it with Obama and they did it with Biden. They didn't do it with Trump. He told Putin he'd drop a bomb on Moscow. He told him this would not be pretty for you if you invaded Ukraine. And not only that, Obama would only give the Ukrainians blankets because he didn't want to offend Vladimir Putin. During the 4 years Trump was president, he loaded them up with javelins, artillery, plus something very, very important that few people know. Thousands of Green Berets went into Ukraine and trained Ukraine soldiers. So the average Ukraine soldier has Green Beret training. This is why they're kicking Russia's butt. People were surprised. They thought predictions were Russia was going to go in, just roll them over in a couple of weeks. And I think Biden wanted that, just like in Afghanistan. He let the Taliban roll over the Afghan army. And what did he do? What did he do? He did nothing except give the president passageway out. So the president of Afghanistan left, free, didn't get harmed, took billions of American dollars, corrupt leader. And Biden was fine with that. And he gave the same offer to Zelensky, thinking, okay, Zelensky's a corrupt politician like the rest of us. He'll take the money. But for whatever reason, whatever his motivation was, he did not take the money and run. He stayed. He stayed in Ukraine and he's fighting. And so I think that plan backfired on Biden. And then the world pressure was so much that Biden had to look like he's against Russia. So then he started arming the Ukraine people. But at first he didn't, if you remember. Again, I'm a blue-collar historian. I don't forget these things. Another interesting thing, we're still buying Russian oil. You're like, no, there's sanctions. Guess what? Listen to me. Joe Biden made the law as such. I told you, he's a corrupt, crooked, inept politician. He made the law where we cannot buy oil from Russia. But if Russian oil gets sent to another country to be refined, it's no longer considered Russian oil. So Russia's been selling tons of its oil to India and Turkey. They're refining it and selling it to us. So we are still funding Russia's army today. I said this on my Rumble channel a year ago that we were buying oil from Russia. And then like a month later, they admitted it and said they're going to stop. And I'm telling you, we're still buying Russian oil. So Joe Biden is supplying The Russian army that invaded Ukraine and killing innocent Ukraine children, and he's supplying funds for Hamas, the face of evil, pure evil, to go into Israel, kidnap Americans too. There's been like 20 Americans killed and dozens kidnapped that we are unaccounted for. Because Joe Biden, according to Bob Gates, scholar, Obama's own Secretary of Defense, has been wrong about every single national security issue his entire career, and he hasn't changed yet. So remember this when you go into the voting booth. Trump may come across as arrogant. He may be arrogant. He may be a lot of things. But he gave us peace, and he gave us Roe v. Wade being overturned. And, you know, they're taking his words out of context and saying he's against Israel. Well, in Israel, they love Donald Trump. There's towns named after Trump. There's bridges named after Trump. You see, he kept his promise to Israel. I'll just give you one example. There's many promises he kept. But all the way back, again, I remember these things. All the way back, I remember Jimmy Carter saying, oh, we're going to put, or Ronald Reagan rather, put him, Jimmy Carter may have said that, but I was a teenager, but I know for sure Ronald Reagan said this. George Bush Sr. said this. George Bush Jr. said this. Bill Clinton said this. Obama said this. All these men promised that they would put the United States Embassy in Israel back into Jerusalem, and they all broke that promise. Donald Trump promised, and within his first year, he put the embassy in Jerusalem. In other words, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, like it is. And everyone thought World War III was going to break out. Instead, peace broke out, because he knew Ronald Reagan's doctrine that he was right about is peace through strength. But it's not just military strength. It's moral strength. You know, having moral clarity. Israel is the good guys. Hamas are the bad guys. Communists are the bad guys. Capitalists are the good guys. You got to have moral clarity. And it's not just military strength or moral strength. It's economic strength. When we became oil independent, the economy boomed. Everything is made from oil. Everything's made from, so many things are made from fossil fuel. It's the engine of our country. And it weakened the other countries that were our enemies. So now we had economic strength. Joe Biden has given away our economic strength, given away our military strength, and given away our moral strength. So remember this when you go in the voting booth, you know. I'm voting for Trump, and that gets a lot of people mad, but I look at results, I look at policies, I don't look at the person, you know, because I don't know Trump, I don't know Biden, but I know their policies, and I know which ones fail and which ones work. I know which ones help men and women, children and babies, and I know which ones hurt and kill men, women, children and babies. And it cannot be any clearer. The points are on the board. 2 new wars started under Biden's administration, 4 peace deals under Trump's. So God bless. Stay Catholic.